All righty, we are here. Welcome, everyone. I am so happy to be invited again to talk to you about growing more food with less pests. We're going to talk about how we can grow successful food gardens and how we can reduce the pests in the garden and have more food for us and less for them, right? So we're in partnership today with SummerWinds Nursery. Thank you, SummerWinds, for inviting me. And I am Suzanne Bontempo. I am the program manager for Our Water, Our World, and I'm really happy to be here today. So welcome. So we're going to go through slides for a good solid 45 minutes. I've got a lot of content to share with you. So I'm going to try to stick to the time. However, I might go over a little bit. So I hope that's okay. And then I'll leave time for your questions afterwards. And what we're going to learn today is how to increase the health of our soil, which means we're increasing the health of our garden. It always starts with the soil. And then how to water effectively and efficiently. And then why, because watering is going to improve the health of the plants as well and help us grow more food, believe it or not. Why working with cover crops is going to help us. And then I'll have some additional resources. And we're going to also talk about a couple common pests that you might be faced with. So as the program manager, I just have to briefly talk about Our Water, Our World, which is a program designed to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality. We are an IPM, or Integrated Pest Management educational program for the public. You might recognize some of our materials that you'll see at SummerWinds, other retailers around the Greater Bay Area and Northern California. We partner with water pollution prevention agencies and retail businesses to help you learn how to solve pest problems with a less toxic approach. So integrated pest management. It is a decision-making process that uses science-based strategies, okay? It allows us to look at the system as a whole. In this case, it's going to be our garden. And then it helps us to identify what the problem really is, because oftentimes what we're seeing are symptoms of a problem. And then from there, we ask ourselves, is this something we can live with? Is this something that we know that's going to be short-termed or kind of correct itself? Or is it something that we have to take action? And if we take action, we take a combination of actions, which we're actually talking about today: cultural controls, increasing the health of the garden; mechanical controls, the tools we use to manage pests; biological controls, these are the living organisms we use to manage the pests; and then the chemical controls, which are the pesticides. We're always going to use the least toxic possible. And typically we're always going for these as a last resort because we've exercised all the other options. So, and then if that's a situation where the plant has never really performed to your liking, give yourself permission just to pull it out, remove it, and replace it with something that's going to be really great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how we apply IPM methods to growing our food and how to set our gardens up for success. And as I mentioned, it all starts with the soil. So healthy food gardens begin, well, actually, food, flower, whatever you got, it's always going to begin with healthy soil. And it's really important, regardless if you've got hard packed clay soil or sandy soil that doesn't hold anything, water and nutrients just move right through it. It is really important to amend your soil with compost. The compost can also be chicken manure, planting mix, soil builder. There's many things at the SummerWinds that you can purchase that are going to amend the soil and that are going to be a soil conditioner and are a compost. We can also if we're not working it into the soil at time of planting, we can work it into the soil prior to, if we've got a whole brand new bed that we want to start to grow food, we can turn the compost into the top few inches of that. And we can also, for established plants, we could do side dressing and top dressing, where we put the compost around the plants, not up against the plant, but around the plants, underneath our layer of mulch. And the reason why compost is so amazing is because it's going to improve the soil structure, regardless if you've got sand or clay or anything in between. When we've got clay, what that compost does, it opens that clay up and adds pore space so that there can be air, that water can move through it with more ease and not just get locked into it, and also allow root systems to grow and other microorganisms like worms. It's going to allow them to grow too. So what I can also share is that when we add compost to the soil, we're inoculating that soil with more microbiology. And that's what we want to do. We want to increase the microbiology in the soil because that in turn is going to support the health of our plants. We're also going to, well, let me share. By just adding 5% of compost to our soil, we have increased the water holding capacity by 4 times. So it quadruples when we add just 5%. So understand that compost, especially now if we're moving into a drought, is really going to be your best friend. And we're going to talk a lot more about that next week's program. But just know that compost is a win-win. And really what we're doing is we're inoculating the soils with the beneficial bacteria and beneficial fungi, which is, I like to explain it as a nutrient transport enhancement system. Doesn't that sound fancy? But what compost is doing, it's helping to break down, well, what that biology is doing, it's helping to break down organic materials and other, like leaf litter and things like that. It's also storing the nutrients in the soil so that those root systems, that plant can take up the nutrients and water on an as need basis. It also, compost is going to break down toxins and pollutants, and it's going to help hold the soil together. Now, you might think that's odd for clay, but what it's doing is it's opening up and allowing for larger pore spaces, but then also holding it together so it just doesn't crumble away. So that's what's really cool and really important. And something I want to share is that a lot of us, this is, kind of an old-fashioned way of thinking, is that rototilling is really important, but it's not. So when we use that rototiller, what we're actually doing is we're breaking up all of that beautiful, well, let's go back. See the hyphae right here, the mycorrhizal fungi. This is like the root systems of the fungi. That is so important. It's this network that is will grab onto roots and help those roots expand, kind of like a bottle brush, just to increase the nutrient uptake and water uptake. It's like supercharges those plants so they can get even more when they need it. And when we rototill, we're actually breaking all of that up as well as compacting the soil. So it sounds a little odd, but because we're breaking it up, but then we're also walking behind it with this heavy machine and then smashing it back down. So it's not really, and we're also digging up weed seeds that maybe have been in the soil. Because let me tell you, weed seeds, the reason why they're weeds is because they're super resilient, and those seeds can lay dormant for years. And when we kick them up, it makes them really happy, and then they want to sprout. So just reduce disturbing the soil. I want to share something that's really cool, is that earthworm castings that you can buy in a bag, or maybe you have a worm bin at home. It's a super food for our veggies. Okay. It contains an abundance of nutrients and minerals that are essential for our plants to thrive. It contains important enzymes and beneficial bacteria and humus that are also going to help provide everything that plant needs to grow a stronger, richer, more dynamic root system and plant growth. So we have stronger plants that are going to be way more resilient, that are going to be able to withstand any type of stresses, like maybe an excessively hot spell or some periods of that are more dry. And then I can also share that these enzymes that move through the plant structure are highly effective at making that plant extremely resilient, and prevents insect pests and inhibits diseases. So it acts almost like a repellent. And then it also neutralizes the higher pH soils, so if that's an issue. Now, organic fertilizers, this is exactly what you want to feed your plants, because it feeds the plants more naturally. The plants are able to actually take the food, the nutrients, those vitamins and minerals of those macro and micronutrients up as an on an as-need basis. It's just whenever they need it. We're actually increasing the microbiology because many of these fertilizers now have mycorrhizal fungi added to them. We're actually feeding the soil microbes, which then in turn are going to feed the root systems of those plants. I'll show you an illustration of that in a minute. It helps organic fertilizers because we're feeding naturally. We're preventing that plant from getting stimulated with a lot of new growth. Understand that synthetic fertilizers act a little bit like a steroid for plants, stimulating a lot of new growth, which is great for color bowls and hanging baskets, because that's why we're buying them, because we want those flowers just to be booming throughout the season. But keep this in mind. What do we do with those flower bowls and those color bowls and those hanging baskets at the end of the season? We typically put them in the green bin because they've kind of pooped out. So that's because that plant has no more energy because it's just been on steroids all season. So when we use organic fertilizers, we're reducing those that stimulation of new growth. And let me tell you something, that when we have a lot of new growth, it's tender, there's a lot of plant sugars. The insects are not ding dongs. They know that they can get their mouth part into those tender leaves and take advantage of all that yummy food and sugars. So it attracts more pest insects when we have a lot of new growth getting stimulated. So when we work with organics, we see less pests. And it's also just an overall more sustainable way to feed your plants. So did you all know how wonderful alfalfa meal is? I will add it 50-50 equal parts. So if I'm adding a cup of dry fertilizer, that was like my tomato or my all-purpose or the Sure Start, I'm putting a cup of alfalfa meal at the same equal parts because it supercharges my plants. It adds nitrogen and trace minerals to the soil, which is just phenomenal. And now it's not too much nitrogen to stimulate a lot of new growth, but it's a nice even blend that's only going to enhance your plant. It's also going to improve the tilth of your soil. It also contains, this is a trip, this natural fatty acid that's a growth stimulant. And that means not that it's going to stimulate a lot of new growth, like I said, the synthetics do. It is a cell growth stimulator where it's going to stimulate the growth of cells to be extremely healthy and happy. So that's where we're going to see greener leaves, glossier leaves, stronger stems, really nice, healthy root systems that are going to grow strong and down and deep so that it's going to be an amazing plant that's going to be able to be extremely resilient to a lot of stresses. Now, through the growing season, I'm a huge fan of fertilizing with liquid fertilizers because the dry fertilizers that we're adding at time of planting, if I'm adding them throughout the growing season of my annual vegetable crops, and annual vegetables are going to be things like lettuces, spinach, chard, tomatoes, zucchini squash, things like that, things I'm planting seasonally, not my perennials, though it's not limited to that. We could certainly feed our perennials in this fashion. But what I like to do is, because I don't want to disrupt that root system, I'm feeding about every week to every other week to maybe once a month with liquid fertilizer. I'm a huge fan of it because, again, we want to, those plants are giving us food, so we need to give it food. Right. So through the growing season, I am a huge fan. And these are all phenomenal products that are extremely good quality that are going to only help your plants thrive. Now, here's that illustration. When we feed with organic fertilizers, we're actually feeding the entire root zone, that entire, zone of microbiology that has that symbiotic relationship with those plants. It's healthy, it's happy, it's alive. When we work with synthetic fertilizers, the chemical fertilizers, and these are the things that are like, have those high numbers like 16, 16, 16s, or when we mix them with water, they turn blue or green. Those fertilizers are strictly just feeding the root systems of those plants. So a couple things to keep in mind. If you're feeding with synthetic fertilizers, make sure you're applying it according to the label's directions, because if it says apply every 4 weeks and you happen to forget and it's 6 weeks later, that plant is starving for food and it's going to become stressed. The second thing I can share is that a lot of synthetic fertilizers are very high in salts. Salts can be quite detrimental to our soils, especially during times of drought. So just be aware of this. And I like to share that plants are going to thrive much better if we're feeding with organic fertilizers. The next thing that's going to be amazing, and I'm sorry, this picture is a little blurry, but putting a layer of mulch on top of the soil is going to protect our soil and help us save a lot of water. It's also going to help our plants grow much better. So when I'm talking about mulch, mulch can be any type of organic material. For me, I mean, there's products out there that are not organic, that are, like maybe, weed block that's synthetic, or like there's a used rubber tire mulch that's like chips of rubber tires and stuff, gravel, or like oyster shell lime, or oyster shells that are crushed. I'm not talking about those materials. What I'm talking about is like wood chips, or any of those bark chips that we can buy in bags, or we can even use compost as a layer of mulch. But my preference is really working with a wood chip. And what we're going to do is when we lay it on the soil, or I also sometimes will use rice straw. You could get that at a feed store, but right now this year, because the wood chips are going to hold the water better, that's what I'm using on around all of my plants, my veggies, my fruit trees, my roses, my perennials, you name it. Because as it decomposes, it's going to add nutrients to the soil. It's feeding the soil organisms. It's also going to prevent weed seeds from sprouting and growing. And if they do, they're a heck of a lot easier to pull out. It reduces water evaporation significantly. It's like 70%. It's a very high number. So means we can water less often. It's really going to hold the water in a nice way. It's not going to keep that soil soggy. It's going to really allow that water to infiltrate and evaporate with a little bit more ease, not as quickly. And, mulch is going to reduce the soil compaction and erosion. But another important thing, it's going to keep the soil cool in the summer, warm in the winter. And what it does is, because it's slowing down the evaporation rate, the plants are able to have a more balanced way of staying hydrated. It's not like they're getting watered and then they're drying out, getting watered, they're drying out. It's this nice, even watering and then evaporating. So please do yourself a favor and put mulch on top of your soil. You're going to notice the plants are going to respond to it, and they're going to it'll stimulate their growth in a really good way. Now, let's talk about the planning, because this is kind of important. So one thing I like to share is, because I lived in San Francisco for 30 years, and I worked in a lot of gardens, we need to be realistic about the type of sun exposure we have. And sun exposure can change, especially if a neighbor had a tree that they planted, 15 years ago, and now all of a sudden that tree is huge and it's putting shade on our garden. We want to be realistic about what is the sun exposure, because we need to understand what we're planting. And here's the thing, when we go to the garden center, we have these tags. These tags are going to tell us a lot. They tell us about sun exposure. They tell us about how big the plant gets. They tell us how many days of harvest, lots of stuff. So understand that full sun is going to be 6 hours or more of direct sunlight. Part sun, part shade is 3 to 6 hours of direct sunlight. Morning is preferred because the morning is the cooler part of the day. That's cooler sunshine. If we have 3 hours of sun in the afternoon, that's hot baking sun, you're going to want to consult with the associates at the garden center to really help you make sure you're getting a plant that can handle that hot heat. Dappled sun, of course, it's filtered sunlight all day. It could be from a tree canopy or like a lattice fencing or something. And then shade is no direct sunlight. And shade can either be bright shade or dark shade. And that's something else to keep in mind. But then from there, when we plant our food crops, especially our annuals, understand it will, a lot of times there'll be recommendations on spacing, like on the Sunset Western Garden book or Pam Pierce's Golden Gate Gardening book. But I like to follow bio-intensive farming practices where we're actually planting a little closer. We're actually planting in clusters on a diamond grid or a hex pattern. And the reason why is because, and it doesn't work for all the crops, but it works for a lot of the crops. It's going to work for, carrots, radishes, beets. It's also going to work for any of our leafy greens, like in this picture. Plants that need a lot of space that really take off and grow, like zucchini squash or any of the summer squashes and even the tomatoes, I plant them closer than recommended, but not that close. But the reason why is because as these grow, they're actually shading the soil, which is doing a couple of things. It's keeping that soil cool, which means those root systems will not get stressed out. It's also reducing the water evaporation. It's making a nice microclimate in there. So actually the ambient air might be really warm, but if you get down in there, it's actually going to be slightly cooler. The other thing is that now I'm going to go through and I'm going to harvest. I'm going to thin the plants. I'm going to harvest like every other one, and I'm going to thin it so that the plants that are staying in the ground can continue to grow and they'll have more space as they mature, but I'm kind of taking out every other plant as I go. And this is a really great way to take advantage of growing more food in smaller spaces. Now, something else to keep in mind that plants really do have friends they like to be planted next to. So it's called companion planting. Now, this is just a chart I got online that's very basic, very minimal. There's way more extensive charts out there. This is from Heirloom Organics, but I just thought that this was super easy. Just we can all kind of identify what this is saying. Companion planting means, and I reference the charts all the time, plants that can grow together without competing for nutrients and for food, or for, their root systems can grow really well together and it won't be a problem. Everybody gets what they need and they're all happy and healthy. So there's other charts like this that you can check out. I know the Farmer's Almanac has a really great list. And Joni, do you all have a list of companion planting at the SummerWinds?
You know what? I'll have to look into that. I am not sure.
Yeah,
but
I know that
I'm
they
going
were.
to add it.
Yeah,
if we don't, we'll get it.
Yeah, they were popular years back.
It is.
But I just like
it's
to
a very
share.
popular thing.
Yeah, so since so many people are growing food now, I just like to remind folks about this. And then
yeah, we will get on it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Joni. And another cool thing is keeping in mind, it's really important to rotate our annual veggies. Now, a lot of us say, I can't do that. I plant my tomatoes in the same spot every year. Well, here's the deal. If we're planting the tomatoes in the same spot every year, we are really putting our plants at risk for viruses, diseases, pests, insects that will just not go away, that will actually thrive because they're living off of that plant. Another thing is that it's good to rotate because all of these different types of food are actually taking up different types of nutrients. Now, someone could say, well, I'll just remove that soil and add new soil. Well, that's just not necessary. It isn't really going to achieve what we're trying to get at. Even if we were talking before we went, turned the recording on, even if you only had 5-gallon containers, figure out what you can grow in a 5-gallon container, because I know for a fact that there are patio tomatoes that will grow just fine in a 5-gallon. And if that's what we've got, that's what we've got. But give the soil a break and please rotate. And then something I love to share, I am a huge fan of heirloom food crops. There are so many varieties of heirlooms on the market now. All the seed companies are selling heirloom seeds. A lot of the vegetable growers are selling heirlooms. You can go out there, check out those tables of vegetables, and just see what they have, because let me tell you, the heirlooms are going to really thrive in our climate. The reason why is because most of them are from Mediterranean regions. And when we plant them here in California, they are going to adapt to our climate with ease. They're going to grow extremely well because they're used to summer dry climates. They're extremely drought tolerant, and they're going to be water savers. So check this out. Heirlooms are amazing. All right. How's everybody feeling? That was a lot so far. Let's talk about working with cover crops because I'm a huge fan. Now, there's a lot of cover crops on the market, like the red clovers and stuff like that, but I'm a huge fan of fava beans. And the reason why is because the fava beans are also a food for me. So I plant the fava beans at the end of at the end of the summer, kind of, well, right around fall, like September, October. And I will dot them around where my tomatoes are about to come out. Like my tomatoes are not out yet, but I've started dotting my fava beans around so that the fava beans can start to grow. And by the time I've cut my tomatoes down, they will, kind of be the next thing. And the reason why is that the fava beans really give us a lot of nitrogen in that soil. Now, it doesn't have to be. I will continue to, depending on what my crop plan is for that next spring, will kind of dictate how I am using the fava beans as a cover crop. Sometimes I just want to grow the fava beans as the beans so I can have the beans to plant for the following year. So with that, I'm not using it as a soil conditioner, and I'll explain that in a moment. However, something to keep in mind is when these fava beans grow, they really prefer cooler season. And once they start to grow, I will take those fava bean tips. I'll cut about 3 or 4 inches. I'll chop it. I'll saute it with garlic and sesame oil. It is delicious. And then, of course, we can let the bean go to bean, and a lot of people enjoy the fava beans. And then, of course, I let them dry so I can have them as seeds for future planting. However, if I'm using it to condition the soil, understand that fava beans are amazing and they have these little nitrogen fixed bacteria on the root systems. Now, this is a very young plant. I had to pull it out because I didn't have a mature plant at the time to get a really good picture. But you see all those little white beads? It might look like perlite, but that's actually the little bacteria that's nitrogen. So there's little beads of nitrogen on the root systems. Totally crazy. And so as we let the fava beans grow, their root systems will really get developed, and they're going to be loaded with these little beads of nitrogen. So what if I am using that nitrogen, I am going to cut the plant at the base right when it starts to go to flower. And the reason why is if I wait too long and I let that plant go all the way to create the beans, favas make very large beans, right? That's a big bean. It needs all that nitrogen to make that big bean. So what it's doing is it's taking that nitrogen from its root system all the way up to the plant to create that large bean. Well, if I want the nitrogen in the soil for my plants, I'm going to cut it at the base right when it starts to go to flower. Beautiful black and white flowers that the pollinators love, but I don't want it to go to flower too long because I don't want it to use the nitrogen to create that bean. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to that grid system of planting. I am going to plant my future crop. Let's just say it's tomatoes. I'm going to plant it between where my fava beans are planted. So as that tomato grows, that root system is going to weave in with that fava bean root system to access that free nitrogen. Also understand that the root system of the fava beans is aerating the soil. So for us that have horrible hard clay, fava beans are your best friend. And then what we can do is we can take the tops and use it as green manure around the garden, maybe chop it up and put it at the bottom of a new raised bed with lots of soil on top of it, or put it in our compost and things like that. But fava beans are amazing. Next, I'd like to share for those of us that were not at the program that we had 2 weeks ago about beneficial insects, it is really important to plant flowers. Don't forget about the flowers. And the reason why is because we want to invite the beneficial insects. We want to invite the pollinators to help increase our yields. We want to invite the birds because the birds are eating a lot of those bugs and other garden allies. So we want to invite these. And the only way to do it is by planting a variety of flowering plants that are insectary plants for our beneficial insects. Understand that so many of our beneficial insects are tiny, so we want to plant flowers that are either clusters of tiny flowers like the yarrow, or that look like that daisy, or the aster in my background, because those are actually, though it might look like one flower to us, it's actually, those petals are actually rays, and that yellow button center is actually hundreds of tiny little flowers. So it's really important to plant these types of plants that look like daisies or sunflowers, or plants that grow in clusters of tiny flowers. And these could be plants like Origeron or Cosmos or Asters, Yarrow, Ceanothus, Agastache, Alyssum, lavender, mint, and the list goes on. So there's a lot of plant lists that are you can access at the nursery. Check it out, and it's a lot of fun. So how many of you have had this problem, blossom end rot on your zucchini? It's different than blossom end rot on the tomatoes. I can't tell you how many times every year someone asks me, hey, I think I've got a fungus in my soil, or I got a really bad plant. I got to take it out. Is there anything I could do to, fix this problem? Because I think that I've got my soil's poisoned because my plants, my zucchinis will grow and then they rot. Well, the problem is lack of pollinators. So if you want to, you can go check out some YouTube videos on how to hand pollinate your summer squash. Go from the male to the female with a little paintbrush. And you can also plant a variety of flowering things that we just mentioned to attract those pollinators so they can pollinate your food crops for you. It's that easy. All right, let's talk about how to plant and how to water. So when we buy plants at the nursery, I'm going to grab those little tags again. When we plant buy plants from the nursery, they are already in this little form. They're either in a 6-pack or 4-inch or 1 gallon. And we're going to take these tags again, and we are going to try to open up those root systems. We want to tease those root systems. We want to encourage those root systems to grow out. Now, you might feel like you're breaking those roots, but that's okay. We're going to be firm but gentle. And we want to go from this to this. You see how they're starting to look out a little bit? Now, I know that they're two different plants, and that one was dry, this one was moist, but the idea is we want those root systems to we just want to score those roots and start to get them to grow out. And then when we water, we need to water. We understand the plant right now is only this, it was just that little cell pack or that little 4-inch. So we want to encourage those root systems to grow out and down. And the only way we can do that is by watering out and down. The roots are only going to go where the water goes. So what we want to do is at the beginning, we might be watering twice a day because that soil could dry out really fast because the root zone is only at the top 1 or 2 of the soil. But as the days progress, as those root systems grow, we're going to be watering less often and deeper, less often and deeper, less often and deeper. And then by August, we could possibly only be watering our tomatoes and zucchini squash maybe just once or twice a week, believe it or not. We are going to ideally water our garden with the drip irrigation system. Now, some of us don't have that. You can hand water, but let me share. It's really important to focus that water at the soil around the root zone, not at the trunk or base of the plant. We want to always water at the root zone, and we want to avoid overhead watering. But when we work with drip systems, it allows us to water effectively and deeply, because those little emitters are making contact directly with the soil, and it's reducing the evaporation. So when we overhead water or use a sprinkler, a lot of that water is actually evaporating out into the air. When we work with the drip system, we actually are seeing less weeds and less disease because, one, we're not overhead watering, so we're reducing diseases, and we're seeing less weeds because we're not watering areas of the garden that we don't have plants. We're targeting the water to what we want to water, which is our plants. When we have irrigation clocks, we're able to set that timer for early in the morning when the air in the soil is still cool. The best time of the day to set the timer is really like that 4 a.m. to about 7 a.m. Because we don't want to water too, like in the middle of the night. We really want the soil and the plants to kind of, be well hydrated before the heat of the day comes on, but then not be oversaturated by the next nightfall. So there's this balance, okay? And then with clay, we can now set the clock for multiple start times to pulse the water out. So if you've got that hard clay and we're only able to water for like 5 minutes and then that water starts to pool, it starts to, it has stopped infiltrating, it's pooling. We can now stop the clock, let that water infiltrate, turn the clock back on, and this is called pulsing the water out. So we can still get the volume of water that we need, but we're taking it in small sections at a time, in small time frames. All right. Now, this is kind of important. I'm not sure how many of us take advantage of the benefits of shade cloth, but shade cloth is really going to help us when the heat of the summer comes on. And if we've got fruit trees or any types of like shrubs that have larger trunks like pomegranates or blueberries, we are going to want to paint the trunks up to where they branch, because where that tree or shrub starts to branch, typically the canopy is shading it to that point, but that trunk is going to want to get painted. It can either be 50-50 latex paint to water, and any light color. It could be white, it could be cream, it could be yellow, it could be soft pink or blue, but it's always 50-50. Or you can get products like IV Organics that is going to be very helpful. But when we're using a shade cloth, I'd just like you to notice how the shade cloth is presented here. It is above, hovering over the plants. It is not closing like we would use like row cover, because the row cover we actually want to lock heat in or prevent insects from coming in. This, we want to have the air circulation. We want to have breeze. This is just going to be hovering over the plants. And what is the best kind of shade cloth? Well, if we have an evergreen plant like camellias that are very sensitive to sun, I might put my 30% shade cloth up as soon, like now, to prevent any type of sunburn. And of course, 10% would be for more sun-loving plants. But for my annual food crops, and during the heat of the summer, I'm looking at a 30 to 50% of shade cloth, which is going to be ideal for protecting veggie crops. Most plants are going to grow best with a maximum of 40%. So we're really looking at that like maybe 30 to 40%, but we can go as high as 60%. It really, you have to be the judge of what is the crop, how much sun does it really want? Because remember, we're not reducing the heat, we're reducing the sun. Okay, because we can't put sun screen on our plants, but we could put up a shade cloth. All right. And then of course, shade loving plants really prefer 75% or higher, depending on the plant's needs. And just to put it in perspective, what's ideal for us is an 80 to 90% shade cloth, up to 100. And that would be like an umbrella. All right. And then from there, I just like to show other ways to manage the pests and keep our garden healthy is by working with barriers. And I like to introduce you to the concept of barriers. So barriers could be row cover, like I was just talking about, which can prevent insects from flying in. Bird netting is a barrier. Bird scare tape works really good. That's more of a deterrent. And actually it's a lot easier to work with than the bird netting, but it's not a barrier. It's more of a deterrent and works very well. But then we've got bird netting. We're going to cover our crops with netting to prevent birds from coming in and eating it. Gopher baskets. We're going to plant our plants in gopher baskets to prevent the gophers from eating those roots. We're going to work with deer fencing to prevent deer and other critters from coming into our garden. And then of course, copper barrier tape prevents the slugs and snails from eating our little baby seedlings when we've planted them. And then something else I'd like to share is exclusion baskets, exclusion frames. We really see a lot more rats and mice in the garden these days. And so it's not just limited to rats and mice. There's squirrels and such and other critters. But I just like to get you thinking about how we can exclude the critters from eating our food. So when it comes to rats and mice, we're going to work with a 1/4 inch hardware cloth. That screen has to be a 1/4 inch in size That hole has to be no more than that because they can fit through anything larger. Gophers, we're looking at 1/2 inch hardware cloth or gopher wire. Squirrels, we're looking at 3/4 inch or poultry wire or similar. Deer fencing, we want it to be 7 feet tall because they can jump over anything shorter. So just check that out. And then we're going to work with traps. So an assortment of traps out there, yellow jacket and fly traps and gopher traps and other rodent traps, sticky traps. So sticky traps can be indicators for us to help us identify when we have to take action, such as, if we've got, because some insects like codling moths or citrus leaf mine are really hard to see. So sometimes it's really a good idea to put traps out to be our indicators. It's also going to kill those insects, but it helps us identify what is happening in the garden. And then one of my favorites is a snail trap. So this is called a snail board. It's made out of like fence boards or any scrap wood you might have around with these little runners on the back. And I put them near my food crops that snails love. For instance, chard. It's so gross when I see them up in the chard, or my green beans. So I put the snail board down, and because they don't like the heat of the sun, they'll go under here for shade. And then what I do is I lift that board and I scrape them off into soapy water, or I feed them to the chickens, or whatever you want to do. So this is a really great way to really take advantage of a trap. All right. And then something else I want to share. It's so important to clean up the garden. We want to harvest our food crops. We want to pick up fallen fruit. We want to pick up the fallen nuts. We want to, because these are going to attract pests like yellow jackets, rats, and other critters. We want to pick up any diseased leaves because those spores can move around the garden and then affect other leaves. We want to prune off any limbs that are broken or any parts of the plant that doesn't look good, that's in question. We just want to, and we want to prune our plants. Like tomatoes want to get pruned, okay? By August, when my tomatoes are taller than I am, I've got them pruned up. The bottom is cleared 18 inches to increase airflow and to eliminate critters from going in there and hiding out and eating my food. So just sharing. And we also, by cleaning up the garden, it's getting us up close and personal so we can monitor for pest problems and see the good friends that are out there helping us, the garden allies. But then it's inevitable that we need to use pesticides. It just is what happens, right? But I want to share, we've already employed all of those other things that I've just talked about. We're increasing the health of the garden. We're using traps and we're using barriers and we're monitoring and we're cleaning up and keeping things nice and organized and, cleaning up any diseases or, down fruit, things like that. We're harvesting our crops. But if we need to go to a pesticide, we're always going to use it as a last resort. I will share by employing all of those other strategies, you're going to already see so many less pests than you would had you not taken advantage of these techniques. But if we have to go for a pesticide, we're always going to choose the least toxic and eco-friendly. We're going to always apply that pesticide according to the label. And let me share, if that pest isn't on the label, that product's not going to work for that pest. We're always going to wear protective gear, which means long sleeves, non-cotton gloves, pants, shoes, a mask. And we're not spraying when there is a breeze more than 5 miles. The reason why, and I'm talking about eco-friendlies, we never know if we can have a dermal reaction to even the least toxic, which is insecticidal soap or neem. And then we want to understand the risks. We're not out there in short shorts and flip-flops spraying pesticides. Come on, guys. And then we also want to understand the eco-friendly products are going to work a little different. It's really important to understand how that active ingredient is supposed to work. Is it a contact kill or is it something that the insects need to ingest? Ask the knowledgeable team how the product is supposed to work. Ask them what to expect. Is it going to take about 4 days before I see the pest gone, or is it an immediate thing? So it's really nice to know what you're getting yourself into. Understand also that timing is important. We want to know that pest life cycle, and we want to apply the pesticide when that pest is present. We want to spot treat. We are not spraying the entire garden because understand most pests are very host specific. They're only going for that one plant. They're not going to go for all the other plants in the garden. We want to avoid spraying trees and shrubs when they're in bloom because that will impact the pollinators. Because remember, even though these are eco-friendly, what this is eco-friendly saying that it's going to be less toxic to our environment. However, it is still a pesticide designed to kill something. So it's going to impact our beneficials. It's going to, it could very well kill our beneficials, our beneficial insects, our pollinators, things like that. We apply the pesticides at the end of the day at dusk. And the reason why is because this is typically when those 4 o'clock breezes have calmed down. It's the cooler part of the day. So we're not risking burning the plants because a lot of the pesticides are oil-based and can burn the tissue. And also our pollinators and beneficial insects are less likely to be active. They're already in their hives or their nests and they're just, chilling out and they're not going to be actively cruising looking for food. And if we are releasing beneficial insects like ladybugs or green lacewings, give them some time to take care of the pests. If I see a lot of aphids, I'm pretty sure there's going to be some beneficial insects because the beneficial insects, if there's no food for them to eat, they're not going to hang around. So I have a very high tolerance and I'll let aphids hang out in very large populations because I know I have beneficial insects that are going to come and take care of them. And this is true. And then we also want to understand the unintended consequences of our actions. And that's really important. So let's just look at some examples of how to apply all of these IPM techniques that I've just shared with you. So number one, we have to be able to identify the pest. If we can't identify the pest, it's going to be really hard for us to resolve that problem. We want to understand the life cycle of that pest. We want to understand the pest habitat and the timing. And a lot of this has to do with understanding what is the plant. If we can identify the plant, it makes it a lot easier to identify the pest. And then we want to notice, are there any beneficial insects present? What are the natural enemies of this pest? Can we attract them? So when it comes to aphids, I will share aphids will increase when we're working with synthetic fertilizers, because as I mentioned before, the synthetic fertilizers will stimulate a lot of new growth. As aphids are going to take advantage of that. When we are excessively pruning, and I'm not talking about strategic pruning, I'm talking about excessive pruning, like hedging things or always pruning, that's also going to stimulate a lot of new growth, which will attract the aphids, as well as other insects. I'd like to share that if I see ants trailing up a plant like my butylon or a plum tree or anything that I have in the garden, that's an indicator to me that there is a pest going on, such as an aphid or thrips or scale insects, maybe even whiteflies, because these insects secrete a sugary substance that we call honeydew, and the ants actually farm that, and they will protect the pest insect from predators. I've even seen a YouTube video where a ladybug is coming to eat an aphid, and 2 ants step in, and one of the ants wrestles that ladybug and pushes it off the plant. Totally crazy. So if we see ants, that's an indicator. So we're going to want to take care of the pests up there, and then we want to use some type of a barrier to prevent the ants from trailing up there. And then another thing is lack of predators. So we're going to see a lot of aphids, even more than normal, when we don't have any beneficial insects around. So how do we reduce aphids? We invite beneficial insects. We feed with organic fertilizers to prevent those plant stresses. We adjust the irrigation systems so that the plants can get nice deep watering and they can get dried out between watering. We want to use sticky traps to monitor. We want to hose off or wipe off the insects. And then we can also use narrow range pesticides like insecticidal soap. Follow the directions. It will say reapply after 5 to 7 days, and you will want to, because we want to kill any eggs that have hatched. And then we also can use products like neem oil or horticulture oil. Whiteflies. Whiteflies, not always the case, but I want to share 8 out of 10 times it's an indicator of overwatering or poor drainage. So if you've got whiteflies on your tomatoes come August, I can assure you, you are watering way too much or incorrectly, or it's not draining well. So, or if you've got whiteflies like on a begonia, maybe in a pot, it could be that the drainage isn't draining well. So you might want to go and turn that pot over and make sure the drainage holes are clear. I can also share that whiteflies really like dry, dusty conditions. So if the above area, the above plant parts that we see, if it's dry and dusty and it's really dense and it's staying dry and, closed in and warm and cozy, it's going to just be a beautiful habitat for whiteflies. So we want to open up those canopies. We want to get some more air circulation through there. And then also synthetic fertilizers are going to stress the plant out in the same way it does with the aphids and attract more of these whiteflies and lack of predators. So whitefly solutions, check our irrigation, check the drainage, increase the airflow, or change the location of the plant. Maybe that plant isn't in the right location. We want to wash off those leaves. We want to invite beneficial insects. We can use soaps and oils. And we use sticky traps as monitoring devices, but also because the adult whiteflies fly away when we use a pesticide or try to wash off, they'll fly and get stuck on that yellow sticky trap, which then is going to break the life cycle. Citrus leaf miner. How many of us are faced with this? Gosh, I remember it came into the Bay Area and South Bay. What was it? 2008. Oh, such a disaster. Anyway, I'll assure you that this is more of an aesthetic problem. It is not impacting the fruit of your tree. So just know that, okay? Straight out the gate. It's just an aesthetic. It looks ugly. It's just really yucky. But the adult moth, different than the vegetable leaf miner, which is a fly. This is a little moth. She's actually really cute. She lays her eggs underneath the leaves. They look like little tiny, tiny grains of rice. That egg will hatch, and then that larva is going to burrow between the two layers of leaves and then mine, feeding on all the juices, all those sugary juices that are between the layers of the leaf, leaving this really kind of almost like a transparent or opaque look to it. So here's the thing. What is going to happen is that if we're feeding our plants, our citrus, with a lot of synthetic fertilizers, or pruning it, not at the appropriate time of the year, which I think Joni and I discussed last time. What we said, you want to prune your citrus in the fall, 6 weeks before the first frost, or after like late winter, very early spring. And if we have a frost, you're going to want to cover that new growth so that you could protect it from the frost. And then this is going to prevent or reduce the citrus leaf miner from coming in and laying eggs on that new growth, because they're not active during the cool time of the year. So that's something to keep in mind. And then, of course, reducing those synthetic fertilizers is a big thing. So how we can control or eliminate or reduce leaf miner is by understanding that there's a parasitic wasp out there that comes and lays its eggs inside the larva, and or maybe it's on top of the egg. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I have to look that up. I'm now doubting myself. But anyway, there's a predatory wasp out there that does an amazing job taking care of the leaf miner. So know that that is possible. And so that's one reason you might want to be aware of maybe not spraying with pesticide. However, we also want to feed with organic fertilizers. Now remember, citrus are heavy feeders. We're feeding regularly with an organic fertilizer, okay? I'll feed with the dry and the liquid. I'll alternate it, really just to bolster the health. I also use sticky traps as monitoring devices. I prune strategically. And if we need to use a pesticide, we've got two that are going to be really very good. What I recommend is working with the spinosad, which is the Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew. This is a pesticide that actually is a sublaminate. It means it's going to absorb into the cells of the leaf, which then now will allow that larva who's mining and eating up all those plant sugars can ingest it, because this is a pesticide that needs to get ingested. This is not a top kill. And it's only good for insects with chewing mouth parts and rasping mouth parts, not insects like aphids. So because I can use this pesticide, that leaf miner larva can ingest it, it's going to die. But because it says on the label, I only get to use 6 times a year, I want to be very strategic about how I use this product. So I'm going to alternate with neem. Now, this is crazy, but I'll spray my spinosad, my Captain Jack's. Let's say it's today. Next week, I'll spray neem. The third application, the third week, I'll spray the Captain Jack's. The fourth week, I spray neem. And then I monitor. Now I've got 4 more applications that I can apply the Captain Jack's to the tree. The reason why is because spinosad, we want to reduce pesticide resilience. We already see it. This is a really important eco pesticide, and we already see that pests have built up pesticide resistance to it, such as the spotted winged Drosophila, that little fruit fly that gets in the cherries and berries. Don't want that to happen to other insects. Neem is cool because neem has anti-feeding properties, and it's also a growth inhibitor. So when we spray it, though it's not getting into the larva because it does not penetrate the cells of the leaf, if it touches the eggs, it's going to prevent them from hatching. And if we've sprayed it on the leaf tissue, that adult is going to be less likely to come in and lay eggs because of that anti-feeding property. So that's why neem is so strategic to alternate with spinosad. So I'll give everyone a second to absorb that one. Powdery mildew. It's getting hot and we're going to start to see powdery mildew because guess what? It thrives in warm conditions when temperatures are 60 to 80 and can actually be active when the temperatures are 55 to 90. Understand that powdery mildew, the spores will blow in the wind and land on the plant, thrives in dry conditions. That's a little bit of a mind bender. Thrives in dry conditions. So how do we prevent it? It also really thrives on new plant growth, plants that are stressed from a lot of synthetic fertilizers or from excessive pruning. How we manage this is by watering mid-morning so that we can wash off the spores. The water kills the spores. But now we've got enough time for that water to dry before the end of the day so that we're not actually encouraging any other diseases like rust or black spot. Okay, so we want to wash the plant material off, but we want that water to be dry before sundown. We can also remove affected leaves. So like my zucchini squashes, I will start to see powdery mildew on the older leaves. It's because they're old, they're just older leaves, and so they're more prone to it. So I just cut those leaves off, put it in the green can. The rest of the plant is fine, but I don't want those spores to blow and affect the rest of the plant. I also know there's a lot of resistant plant varieties out there, especially crepe myrtles, roses. I've heard some squashes and melons that are varieties that are going to be resistant. So look into that. And then if we need to use products, we have the copper soap and the neem, but it's really important to spray on top and under the leaf because the spores will go through the leaf. And when we've got bigger insects like beetles, this is a cucumber beetle, or slugs or loopers or caterpillars, any of those other pests, I walk around my garden with a little bucket of water and I'll just plop them in, knock them into that soapy bucket. But here's the thing with cucumber beetles, they have this defense mechanism. When they see you, they drop. So if I've got my soapy bucket of water underneath, and they're just going to drop right into it. And let me tell you, those cucumber beetles are buggers. The newest thing that we are hearing about all the time, and I'm sure Joni can agree with me, is rodents in the garden. And a lot of times you don't know if it's a squirrel or a rat, but I can assure you most often it's a rat, I'm sorry to say. So we want to remove those places of harborage. We want to disassemble or those wood piles or those brick piles or flagstone piles that have been sitting out there for years, because most likely those rodents are nesting in there. We want to remove those big fields of ivy. I'm sorry, I know it's a huge task, but you got to do it. We want to contain our compost and our chicken coops with that 1/4-inch hardware cloth. Make sure there's lids on them. Make sure there's a bottom on them. We do the same thing with the garbage cans. Make sure those lids are closed. We want to remove pet food availability because we're leaving pet food all day out for like those feral cats. Well, guess what? Someone else is coming too. So the kitty cats and the dogs are smart. If you're only putting that pet food out from like 8 a.m. to 8:30, let me tell you, they're going to wise up and they're going to feed and they're going to be out there waiting for their pet food. I can also share that we want to rethink bird feeders because it might be fun to feed the birds, but let me tell you, there's a lot of plants out there that are food for the birds that are not food for the rodents, because that bird food just flies down on the ground and then it's a little smorgasbord for our rodents. And then we want to use the barriers. So this picture on the bottom came from the Instagram Homestead Design Collective. Well, let me tell you, this is like Sunset Magazine, like level of photography. Everybody has rats in their garden, so everyone's coming up with these really clever ways to exclude them. And let me tell you, pollinators can still make their way through. And if it's a situation where you are worried if they can or not, then put 1/4-inch on the sides and 1/2-inch on the top. You can get creative, but also this is going to prevent birds from coming in and eating your little starts. It's not just for the rodents. And for gophers, always plant your plants in gopher baskets or line the raised beds with 1/2-inch hardware cloth or proper gopher wire. We can work with traps. Understand that traps are a very excellent way to manage the gophers, but persistence. We have to be patient. We have to be persistent. We have to be checking, morning, noon, and night. And let me tell you, if you're really getting frustrated and you keep using these gopher traps and they keep burying them, well, just do yourself a favor and watch that movie Caddyshack, because sometimes we just need a good laugh. Anyway, there's also really effective repellents on the market that are castor oil based. They do need to be applied a couple of times before they're effective. But remember, repellents are just temporary deterrents. They are not going to solve the problem. So just like to share that. But sometimes we can't get a gopher basket down there. Like I have sweet peas on my deer fence. I got to use the repellent. And then it's fine for the season. So in close, tips, we're going to recap. We're going to build healthy soil with compost, organic fertilizers, and mulch. We're going to plant the right plant in the right place. We're going to water deeply. We're going to invite beneficial insects. We're going to monitor for pests and properly identify them. We're going to address the cause and evaluate. We're going to harvest our food. We're going to enjoy the bounty. Some online resources that are going to really help you is the Our Water Our World website, as well as the UCIPM website. UCIPM has an amazing catalog. If you can identify the plant, it will help you identify the pest. So with that, thank you for joining. Oh, and I'm so sorry I went over the hour. I'm so sorry, but we got started late and there was so much information I wanted to share with you. Thank you for joining. I'd like to finish with your questions, pop those questions in.
We have lots of questions. Though every time you do a webinar, I go, I don't know anything.
Oh, stop it.
I think, oh my God, I have to go study now because there's so much, but it's so interesting. All right, so let's get to questions though, and I'll take them in order that they came in, okay?
Okay.
A lady would like to know, if you use earthworm castings, do you also fertilize?
Oh, yes. And I apologize. And I meant to say earthworm castings are kind of a combination between like compost and fertilizer. It's just one more thing I'm adding to my soil because I want my plants to be as healthy as possible. So I want to set them up for success. So I am giving them everything I can.
Good. Okay, so someone else wants to know, you touched on how you keep your tomatoes cut up. They would like to know a little bit if you could touch on more on pruning, especially indeterminates.
Oh, yeah. So I do know there's a number of videos on YouTube you could check out that are very helpful. It will be a little hard for me to really go into detail without having a physical plant in front of me because it's hard to explain the plant parts. But as my plants grow, I am thinning the leaves at the bottom. So even though my plants right now are probably just about 12 inches high, I've already thinned. That means I've removed a layer of leaves so that no leaves are touching the soil. I do not want leaves touching the soil because that's a ramp for insects, but also it also can cause disease if the soil around, if that soil in that area is wet from my drip irrigation. As the plants grow, I will thin. And typically what you're going to see is a main trunk. You might have a couple main trunks and you can identify what you want them to be. And when there's a leaf, there sometimes is a new branch coming out. That can be a branch that is going to produce more food. I don't need 100 pounds of tomatoes, which an indeterminate tomato can probably give you depending on what it is. So I'm thinning so that I'm removing those, where that leaf is, where there's a new branch. I'm just thinning. I'm just nipping those little branchlets off strategically to have a nice shape to help my tomato grow, but also so that I can thin it enough so I can actually harvest the food that's in the middle and not have so much that it could, like also the tomatoes can get really heavy if we don't have it supported properly. So it's just nice to thin and just to be out there and just kind of, yeah.
Okay, so I think you touched on sometimes if you wait long enough, that answer presents itself. One of our attendees would like to know if the slides will be sent out after the call. Would also love a copy of all those companion planting and crop rotation charts. I think you mentioned those were available online.
Yeah. If you email me, my email is on this, or better yet, I will send Joni and Shelly those slides, the companion planting slides, well, the PDFs, because I have them, and they can email them to you, or you can email me. I'm happy to do that as well. This is a recorded program, so the recording will be available to you on the SummerWinds website, I believe, right?
Yes, yeah. She also would like the crop rotation charts too, if you could. I thought that was really interesting too.
Right.
A lady here has questions about growing Japanese eggplant. She says, any tips? And there were small flies by the base.
I would be mindful that we are we've planted it correctly, we are watering it correctly, and we have a nice layer of mulch that isn't coming up around the crown of the plant. Now, it's not always easy to identify the crown of plants, of vegetable crown, because like, for instance, tomatoes want to get planted deeply. So with the eggplant, you want to make sure you haven't planted it too deeply, that it's planted properly, that the irrigation, we're going to get more into this next week, is not at the crown. We want to start to move those emitters out as the plant grows, because we always want to grow out here. And at some point, the plants are going to go beyond that zone, which is fine, but we're still watering out so that we can encourage those root systems to go out and down. And we want to let the soil dry a couple of inches. So if you've just bought, let's just say, a 1 gallon plant, you've planted it, and we've watered deeply, we're going to let the top inch or two dry because we've got many more inches of root system down there. If it's a cell pack, we're probably just letting the top 1/2 inch dry, because that is a very small cell pack, root zone, until we've been able to encourage that root zone to grow deeper. So you might want to just check to make sure you're letting the plant dry out, the soil dry out around the plant. And you're fertilizing it with organic fertilizers. It's in the right place. It's getting the appropriate sun. It's getting appropriate shade. It's it's got everything it needs.
I'm glad you brought up about the next webinar on watering, because I would think you would agree with me, when people come to the nursery with a piece of a plant or whatever, 9 times out of 10, it is a water issue, either over or under. Yes. Most of the time it's over, because we're going to kill that little baby with kindness, because we love it so much. We're going to make sure it gets a drink of water every day, whether it needs it or not. So I think it's really good. And you brought up something I never thought about, moving the emitters. I mean, that's kind of like, duh, I know, but I never thought about it as the plant grows.
I know.
So I'm looking forward to that. All right, someone else, you touched on the fact that rats are rats. We all have them. What do you recommend for rodent control, traps versus bait boxes?
Oh, that's a really great question. Thank you for asking. I I want to know that I've killed the critter. Not to be grotesque, but if I want to make sure I've killed it. So I, as well as a lot of other professionals that I've learned from, are really support kill traps. Kill traps can be electric traps. They're very humane, or like the snap traps that we see. They could be, like the wooden snap traps, like a Victor, or those Jaws type. We want to be able to kill that critter. If we working with the bait boxes, understand that there's a lot of risk, and the risk can be a number of things. Where one, you don't know that that rodent's really dead. If that rodent is cruising around, something else can eat it, and that's secondary kill. Understand it takes a number of days for the rodent to actually eat enough of that bait, or for that active ingredient to do what it needs to do to kill that rodent. During that time, that rodent could still be reproducing and breeding. If there's other food sources around, that rodent is eating the other food sources, it's going to dilute that bait, making it less effective to ineffective. So there's a lot of reasons why I am not going to go for any type of poison bait, because it's not the most effective way to manage the pest. I'm looking at how can we effectively manage the pest. The best way to manage it is with elimination and exclusion. So
Thank you. This one, I'm going to push two questions together, because somebody was asking whether or not we should mulch the seedlings. And then someone else wants to know your thoughts on diatomaceous earth to protect the seedlings.
yeah. So I know mulching the seedlings. I myself, I'm always in this dilemma, timing. So if I put seeds straight in the ground, I typically like to wait until I see them sprouted before I put some mulch around. Now, if I have something that's really fine, or a mulch like the rice straw, because the rice straw kind of hovers, the seedlings can still grow through that. Because we're in a situation where it's already hot and dry, I'm using arbor mulch. I'm using a wood chip mulch because I want to have really good thick coverage, and that's something that I can't really achieve with this rice straw. So I have already waited for some of my sprouts to sprout. And if I'm transplanting, little cell packs or 4-inch, that's fine. It's going to be really easy to put mulch around them. But again, remember, I'm only putting mulch. I'm always leaving about a inch radius around the plant, so that I'm not covering the soil right at the base of that plant. But I'm really doing a nice job of putting a thick layer around, and it really regulates the soil temperatures, and it really regulates, monitors the watering in a way that only increases the health of the plant.
I think another good thing to remember, besides at least what we do, is we never mulch right up to the stem or the branch. You leave what you think might be the root ball-ish area, like you said, a circle, like a plate, and also never more than 4 inches thick.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but you don't put it on so thick that water can't even permeate.
Yeah.
About mulch, somebody wants to know if they should mulch with wood chips in their planter boxes, around their tomatoes in their planter boxes.
Yes, I just did this myself. It is just because, and it's going to help you because planter boxes have a tendency to dry out faster, So I have, I even have roses in terracotta pots, which people frown upon, or, like your tomatoes in terracotta. Put a nice layer of mulch. And what happens is that the water is able to move through that soil as opposed to running off that soil. When we have mulch on top, the mulch almost acts as like this filter that allows the water just to infiltrate with ease. So yes. But again, like Joni said, don't bring the mulch up around the stems, just around the soil.
I think also, not to get off on a whole tangent about mulch, but there are some mulches that are very popular now. Please check with your gardener or your garden center before putting anything that has been dyed or chemically treated. Black, for instance, is going to leach into the soil and the water table.
Yeah. So Joni, good point. Something else I can share is that, if you really like the look of the colored mulches, some of them are vegetable dyes, so make sure that's what you're getting. But Joni just mentioned the black mulches. The black mulches will hold a lot of heat. So fine if you're in San Francisco out in the avenues where it's cool and you really want to capture that heat, but down in the peninsula where we easily get 90-degree days and plus, above, we don't want to hold on to that heat. So it's really nice just to go with the natural arbor chips or fir bark chips or the micro, whatever y'all sell. Yeah, the bags of mulch that we sell.
Do you know of, we're back to the rats and repelling rats. Rats is always a really good one, huh? Everybody wants to talk about the rats.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know any plants that repel rats?
Again, that could be tricky. So in theory, mint is supposed to. However, how much mint? But I don't really want mint growing in my garden because it could take over.
Invasive.
So really, no. I have to say, I don't know any plants. There again.
I don't either.
And I know that rodents are really a hard thing. Like no one really wants to go out and kill them. That's really hard. But here's the deal. One of the reasons why the rats are so bad is because we're also, we're really squeamish for good reason. I don't like to kill things, but we just have to get a little brave. And, we just have to get a little brave and we just have to reduce the numbers.
I think they're just so creepy. There's just, I don't know why. I think little mice are just so cute, but you show me a rat and I'm like, ew.
I'm freaked out too, trust me.
Okay, somebody is asking, our little tomato and cherry tomato plants just started having its first set of flowers. I've heard that we should nip those first few flowers. Is that true?
I don't. Do you? What do you think, Joni? Some people do.
I think, I think everybody has their way of doing things. And I think that whether it's Love Apple Farms, put the fish head in the hole.
Yeah.
That really, at the end of the day, it's the fact that you're looking at your plant more than you would have. You have invested emotionally more in that plant. And so whatever you have done becomes the most successful thing you should do every single time. And what you should continue doing every single time is looking at your plant. Like when you said that you walk in your garden every morning, it's true. You're going to spot your funguses, your things right away. You're going to, see an ailing plant right away. So I think a walk in the garden is every day is really good. Okay, one more. How can I set up a pea plant? How can I set a pea plant up for success? What if the base leaves go yellow? Should I prune them?
Well, I know that peas like a cooler season. So right now the peas are going off. If you're just putting peas in the ground now, it might be a little late, but who am I to say? I don't know your environment. You might have an area of the garden that stays cooler, or maybe you're going to take advantage of some shade cloth or things like that. When the yellowing leaves can be an indicator of not enough water, too much water. It could be, that the poor drainage. So sometimes it
could be a natural shed.
Yeah, it could be older leaves that just are wanting to. I'm already removing yellowing leaves from some of my roses. That's just kind of normal. When it's more than 10%, I'd be like, And if it's 20%, I would definitely go to the garden center and put the leaves in a bag. Take pictures with your phone.
Thank you.
Yeah. And, maybe put a pencil next to it so there's some scale and have pictures so that the associates can help you.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I think there are things like when people say, why are my gardenias getting yellow? Well, first of all, that's their nature. Their nature is they are huge iron lovers. So you got to throw stuff at them all the time. I never advocate just one, what do I want to say? I would rather use an acid fertilizer that hits all the macro and micronutrients than to just throw iron at it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's the nature of the beast to lose some yellow leaves. So sometimes don't panic, don't freak out. The other thing that I've noticed too is in pruning or whatever, especially some of the bulbs, if you've got to yank the you-know-what out of it to get that leaf off, they're not done with it. I think plants are very good at letting you know when I'm done with it because it comes off very easy. So if you're playing tug of war with your plant, leave it on. I think you answered everybody's questions. I don't see, oh wait, some more popped up if you have time.
Yeah.
Let me see if I hit them all.
Joni, you're awesome.
Did we talk diatomaceous earth? And
That's right. I
totally
totally
good.
forgot.
Okay.
I thought there was one more. I'm so sorry. So diatomaceous earth is awesome. It is inert. It's not toxic. It's crushed diatoms that come from the bottom of like waterways. If you've ever been to Bernie Falls, there's this really cool path, and you're actually walking on the part that's come up from the below the surface. I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's like chalk. So if you can think about how fine chalk is, and if you ever can remember writing on a chalkboard or using chalk like on the sidewalk, it sticks to your hands. It's essentially like for insects, like microscopic fiberglass. So insects see it as a deterrent. They don't want to walk across it because if it gets on them, it will dehydrate them, just like it dehydrates our hands. And so it's very good and very effective as a barrier. So I could do a little sprinkling of it around my seedlings because I know the roly-polies and the earwigs want to come and eat them too. So it's going to be a good deterrent. However, here's the thing. One, diatomaceous earth is a lung and eye irritant. So we don't want to breathe it in. So when you open up that bag and you get that big poof in your face, make sure you're wearing a mask or just be really careful. I've done that way too many times. The other thing is that when we put it around the plants, we live in an area that gets a lot of fog. There's a lot of condensation. And what I have found is that when it gets wet, it gets kind of mucky. Now, I've heard people say it still works when it's wet and it kind of became that mud, but I don't see that. So I'm just sharing that when it gets kind of mucky, I feel like it's ineffective. So and that's the challenge. It's hard to keep things dry, especially if we're overhead watering and if we've got a lot of like condensation in the air, moist, foggy days.
I think we could talk for 5 hours about watering.
I know. See, Joni, how we just get.
I know, but I mean, it's so crucial. And you think it's the number one issue with associates here, training associates how to properly water. And we work here. Well, anyway, everybody is very enthusiastic saying that you were awesome and great. And I think you're awesome and great. And every time we get to do one of these, I'm ready to run out and look for bugs and do all kinds of stuff. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. These are really, really fun.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful to be here with everyone. You guys are all incredible. And we hope to see you next week where we talk about irrigation and water and how we get through with a water-wise effect. So thank you, everyone. Have a great
day, everybody.